To people who have also worked with multimillionaires or billionaires, what is something different they do from ordinary people? One old money rich person treated me to a fancy meal and she was super polite and nice and tipped well. What struck me was the decisiveness and confidence that everyone there would cater to her, and they did. She wanted X dish they didn't make that day. They made it. The one that sticks with me was at the end. She said, "I want a cappuccino with a little something. I want them to put a design on it." Like, I've gotten cute cappuccinos in my life. It doesn't even cost extra. It never occurred to me to just ask for everything I want all the time. This was also the same person that on a business trip hugged me after the flight. "I did it!" Me. "Oh, was this your first time in economy?" "No, flying commercial." Just so we all understand how rich. Story 2. He managed time very differently than anyone I was used to. For example, our meeting with him began precisely on schedule, lasted 30 minutes, and there was no chit-chat. Before this meeting, we had a pre-meeting with his admin to discuss expectations. The admin explained that we had to be on time, no introductions or titles, just name, no small talk, no marketing. Be prepared to answer technical and financial questions quickly and succinctly. For the latter, if there were numbers, we had to know precisely which page of the material had the information. When the meeting took place, we were brought in exactly to the second at the start time. Sat down and within 30 seconds he was asking us all manner of questions. I had to field technical questions that appeared to be asked not so much for whether my answer was right, but that I didn't hesitate. I also gained a healthy respect for my manager as he was sharp, and he answered quickly and accurately. Story 3. My son's friend, when in elementary school's dad, was one of the 2 founders of Capital One. Mom had a secretary for playdates. Dad would fly to London to watch Tottenham. Had a permanent seat. Their London house was next to J.K. Rowling's. You couldn't tell by the way they dressed or their cars, but their vacations were the big difference. The strange thing is that their son loved a mango juice sold maybe 10 to 15 minutes from their house. I always made sure we had some for mine. I sent it to him via Amazon occasionally. A secretary for playdates is wild. How many playdates are going on in that kid's life? Story 4. I work with lots of millionaires and a few billionaires. Most work non-stop. There's no boundary between workday, holiday, weekend, etc. But there is also no boundary between friend, family, coworker a lot of the time. It is easy to forget the cost of things when money is meaningless. When a $500,000 Ferrari is the financial equivalent to a gallon of milk for most families, then spending $20,000 on a party that includes private chefs, a bar staff, etc. is nothing. What happened recently was that someone mentioned there were a bunch of kids in Mississippi who were getting trained at trade schools for jobs, but the certification exam was $350, so only 2 kids out of the 35 in our pilot program got certified. It was hard for anyone in that room to understand how these families couldn't come up with $350 having a whole year to prepare. Most people in that room bill at $250 to $500 an hour if they work at all. 2 days ago, someone took me out to lunch and the bill was $250. But since it's Christmas season and the waitress was really great, he tipped $250. A different time, we went out for drinks. The bartender was one of those, "Tell me what you like and I'll make you something." The lady goes to pay and just writes math in the tip line and puts $500 on the total. We ordered less than 3 drinks a person for the 4 of us. On the other hand, there are lots of times when someone says something completely off-the-wall elitist. I grew up incredibly poor, and some of these are like 5th or 10th generation wealth. They grew up with maids and butlers and private planes, and their great-grandparents have buildings all over the US named after them. One time, one of them was talking about how she went to Walmart to people watch and never felt unsafe even though it was the black part of town. She tried to, in her words, make some black friends because if I could befriend them, then I could educate them on better financial decisions. It was such a condescending and racist approach, we had to counsel her to never do that again. Another guy says things like, "The blacks will blank," and he thinks he's very woke. Aside from all that, there's a general loss of touch with what everyday people face. The duality of wealth, huh? Tipping $250? Amazing. Thinking you can educate an entire race of people and that's the problem? Okay, less great. Story 5. My aunt and uncle are self-made millionaires. If you met them, you would think they were well off, but nothing spectacular. In general, they're both very frugal. However, the 2 areas where they completely detach from ordinary life are 1. Vet bills for their animals. The example that most stands out in my mind is their last dog. He needed dialysis and no vet where we live could provide it. So they did their research and discovered that the best treatment in the country was available in London. So a flat was rented for the 6 months the dog would need treatment for, and my uncle would stay in it for 1 week a month while the dog had his treatment, and then travel back home the other 3 weeks. 2. Legal help. Neighbors being pains in the backside, send in the solicitor. Trying to organize a purchase or sale and it's taking too long? Pay the solicitor to fast track. Local council leaving traffic lights up for over a week after work has been completed? Cry havoc and let slip the solicitors of war. Story 6. I do consulting for public companies and work directly with CEOs and board members, so they're all multimillionaires, but only a couple in the 3 comma club. 1. There is no demarcation between personal and professional time. We should set up a call, meaning vaguely next week. They'll respond with, I'm free at 10 a.m. on Sunday while I'm at my kid's ski lesson. 2. They ask a million questions about every detail. This is the #1 personality trait I've noticed. The critical thinking is to the point where if you misspeak one word that is easily well misunderstood, they will question you to be certain. I do think this is one of the many factors that has made them successful. Story 7. I was born to working class parents who made it to the upper middle class and put me in old New England prep schools. So I grew up around a lot of super rich people despite not being one myself. There were exceptions, but generally the old money families were pretty humble and unassuming. One of my closest friends, for example, grew up in a legit mansion. 15,000 plus square feet in the primary residence. Had several other houses in various states/countries, a yacht, just endless money. And yet, he still grew up wearing hand-me-downs from his older brothers and family friends. These families had the mindset of, we have endless pits of money, so we'll buy whatever we want. Alongside, it's silly to spend money for the sake of spending money because we don't need to prove ourselves to anyone. As a result, you end up with these weird inconsistencies. Like, this kid is at my house talking about how his mom just bought a second set of horse stables so she has a place for her horses at her favorite vacation house. While my mom, who grew up in the projects, is wondering why his jacket has a tear with a duct tape covering it. They spent money for pleasure, utility, and convenience, not for status or superficial reasons. In comparison, the first or second generation money families tended to be concerned with keeping up appearances and buying fashionable things. Again, there were exceptions, but this was definitely the trend. And there's probably something to be said for the first or second generation families being the one who care about that kind of stuff. It could mean that the later generation ones knew to not care about that stuff and that's why they maintain their wealth. Who knows? Story 8. My experiences. 1. CEO of a large company. Didn't come from huge wealth, so fairly self-made. As others have said, a literal workaholic, 24/7, 365 days a year. Zero boundaries between work and personal. And expected the same of his direct reports, unfortunately. Endless energy, perfectionist, and his wife was a total jerk and his adult kids hated him. 2. Billionaire who inherited his wealth. Was on his ranch in the West and this cowpoke guy went with us on horseback. Was on his ranch in the West and this cowpoke guy went up with us on a horseback ride. He also cooked breakfast. I literally thought he was a hired hand. Ends up he was the owner of the ranch. Was kind, friendly, could rope a steer like the true hired hands, and make some mean breakfast tacos. Of course, he flew to the ranch on his private jet, while we got there dragging an economy class with 12 hours of delay. That first one, the end of it, not too unexpected, right? If someone has no boundaries between personal and work, their family is bound to not love that. I'm always a little surprised when I hear these people have actual families, and it makes me wonder, did you do this because you felt it was the thing you should do or because you actually wanted it? It's hard to tell sometimes. For the record, I think it's completely fine to be a complete workaholic, but also understand you might not be available enough for a family. Story 9. I've worked in 2 companies that went from nothing to $2 billion in sales in 20 years. The founders were all engineers and still worked alongside us. My favorite one used to ask permission to sit at my lunch table. He's easily the greatest human being I've ever known. You would never know the kind of money he had if you saw him. He still drove the car he restored himself in college. He would drive across town to save 5 cents a gallon on gas. Just from his public stock trades, we knew he had hundreds of millions, though. And this was in the 90s. I still talk to him, and I emailed him last week. Honestly, all of the founders have been something like him, although he was the greatest one. The others did spend their money, though, sometimes extravagantly. One, for example, had married a history major and had the hobby of relocating historic buildings to his property. His house had museum-quality antiques, such as George Washington's dinner table, and he actually used them. I guess by the strictest definition, I'm a multimillionaire, as the first digit of my Fidelity account does go to 2 sometimes. As a nearly 50-year-old engineer, that's not unusual, though. Millionaires aren't what they used to be. Story 10. I've nannied for millionaires. It was new money, and they had both grown up fairly blue-collar. They were very down-to-earth, giving, and kind. Their children, however, had no rules, structure, or expectations inside of the house. Their previous nanny gave them whatever they wanted. That changed when I stepped in. I firmly believe kids need to know how to clean a bathroom, wash dishes, sweep a floor, and clean their rooms. Took about a year to get to that point, but I can rest easy knowing they're both currently in college and know how to clean the toilet. Okay, I was straight up judging OP for the start of this. I was thinking these kids were like under 10, and I'm like, really? Clean a bathroom? I don't know, OP. But no, if they went off to college, sure, super fair. Story 11. I was installing a floor in this Texas castle, and there was this guy who kept coming over to check out my work. I thought he was the laborer of some other trade, but he was friendly, so we just kind of started talking about life and stuff. I got to a point where I needed a hand to finish the install, and when the guy got there to help, the same guy came around checking our finishes, and the guy helping me snapped up and started getting really attentive. When the guy walked away, I asked him why he was tripping out. He told me that was the client. He was a billionaire and owned all of the property that your eyes could see. So one thing they do was go about their lives like a normal person. Story 12. My friend was a pilot for a very large aluminum business, think aluminum foil. The brothers would fly for business meetings and my friend would make all the arrangements, including car rentals. These guys would drive off and go to meetings, dinner, etc. Sometimes they would just leave the rental car behind and ride with others to change venues or whatever. He tried to tell them the rental doesn't stop unless the car gets returned, and they didn't really care. If it was any level of inconvenience, they just moved on. It was more than once he had to go back and find a car based on their recollection and get it returned. Story 13. The way they get cash. Grew up in a very wealthy family who, though they had credit cards, never chose to use them. They also never had a debit card because they weren't really a thing in the 70s and 80s. My dad used cash almost exclusively. My family offices were in a bank's high-rise, and once a month my dad would get cash delivered up to his office from the bank by a security guard. It would come in a sealed, clear plastic envelope with a sheet of paper certifying the amount delivered. If he was making a big purchase like a car, he would get that amount rounded up to the nearest thousand. And if I was lucky enough to be in the office, I would get $100 for peeling off the excess cash from the stack. If we were traveling, it wasn't uncommon for him to request a couple $100,000 at a time. This would also come sealed in a clear bag, but the bank would send an assistant with a counting machine to verify the amount in front of our bookkeeper. My dad died before the 90s, and I never once saw him step into a bank lobby or a bank drive-thru. In his business, he also got dozens of random amount checks every month, which would go into a file and be sent to his personal banker to be deposited. Our business could also just get loans with a phone call. I remember my grandfather telling our banker to arrange a multi-million-dollar loan in the early 80s for some radio stations he was buying, and our banker's reaction was just a nod. I feel like seeing $100,000 in cash would make my brain explode. Definitely not money I've ever handled in my life. Nor will I ever, admittedly, with the change over to digital stuff, so I guess fat stacks are a thing of the past, huh? Story 14. Doesn't drive. Has a driver, and he doesn't sit in the back of a Rolls or a limo. He has a frickin' Mercedes van with tinted windows, PS5, bar, couch, small writing desk, and even a frickin' painting in there. Haven't ever seen him wear a suit. Cargo shorts, Swatch watch, wedding ring, and old running shoes. Shops online and buys like pretty cheap stuff and compares prices. Orders food online but compares restaurant prices and value for money. Doesn't have a jet but flies first class everywhere. Doesn't have a yacht but rents staffed yachts. If he does drive, it's in a Mini Cooper. Has had the same Android phone for a few years. Goes to mid-level bars and restaurants, nothing exclusive. Can I just say, I can't explain why, but these are my favorite type of rich people. They're still conscious about prices, they compare stuff, and just make decent decisions. Also, not having a private jet in my mind is actually a plus for a person. It's just so unnecessary and bad a lot of the time. I get the convenience, but man, the cost on the earth is pretty brutal. Looking at you, Taylor. Story 15. Okay, the difference is old money versus new money. I was a field tech, IT, in my 20s. I liked old money versus new money any day. Old money, clients were wealthy for generations. When you compliment their amazing chandelier, they ask what brand you have, not knowing that not everyone can afford a $500,000 chandelier. New money came into money this generation and tended to be stingy and assume you're out to rob them. My old money clients tended to treat me very well, wanted additional services, and as long as I delivered what was on the invoice, we were golden. New money more often didn't want to pay, had to fight for payment, would nickel and dime each job/repair. I had a guy argue I should source used parts for his computer builds because it would be cheaper, except I can't warranty a used part. That's interesting. If I had to guess, I would have thought that old money would be worse to work for a lot of the time. But there is that insecurity with being really rich that new money brings, so that makes sense. $500,000 chandelier though. Oh boy, that's a lot. Story 16. I feel like you can kind of tell in this thread who has actually interacted with a real billionaire and which people are just going off of internet anti-work BS. I worked in a role that reported directly to a billionaire for 7 years. This guy didn't just have money, he was also one of those who had power. The non-stop crazy work ethic was there. He would think nothing of working till 4 a.m. taking a nap till 7 a.m. and then keep going. He hated the fact that he needed to sleep. The more interesting thing was how he parsed and prioritized information. He placed zero emphasis on anything reported by media, social media, Google, Wikipedia, or anything on the internet. If he wanted real information, he would think nothing about dropping $250K to get access to real researchers, engineers, or experts for a consultant to seek their opinion. Sometimes it was related to investments. Other times he just wanted to settle who was right. He was better at math, engineering, and engineering design than most mid-level engineers, and in his areas of specialty, he had very few peers. Period. Story 17. My brother is a gazillionaire. I don't really know how wealthy he is, but it's a lot of zeros. He owns multiple businesses, which he created from scratch. He treats all his employees very well. He takes good care of them and their families. They're extremely loyal and have stayed with him for many years. As others have mentioned, he is always on. He's always looking for a new angle. He does business on his cell phone while riding a ski lift. But he also does a great job of being in the moment. He can be horsing around with his grandkids and then, in 2 minutes of slack time, checks his email and makes a huge business decision, before going back to his grandkids with gusto. He lives in a beautiful home which, while luxurious and well-appointed, is modest by gazillionaire standards. He and his wife are gracious and generous hosts, not to show off their property, but to make their guests feel welcome and comfortable. Their guests aren't just fellow gazillionaires, but they cover the entire socioeconomic spectrum. He doesn't flaunt his wealth. He does have an expensive hobby and he takes his family on expensive vacations, but he doesn't make a big deal of either one. Plus, he invites his brothers on ski trips and such, and all we have to do is show up and have a good time with him. The best thing is that he's a silent philanthropist. He quietly gives away buckets of money. He doesn't brag about it, he just does it. It goes to scout troops, churches, schools, international foundations, single mothers, the list goes on. I've only ever found out about his giving indirectly, never from him. If anyone ever deserved their wealth, it's him. He knows how to make money, save it, spend it, and give it away. Story 18. The ones I've worked with have been high-paid but not ridiculous senior colleagues doing it for a while and just saved up. Or legit C-suite people who have millions and millions. Virtually all of them are very A-type workaholics who excel in basically everything they do. Most have uprooted for jobs across the country or across the globe multiple times, career the top priority, etc. The senior colleagues doing it for a while are unmistakably A-type, but not all business. But C-level folks are a whole different level bordering on scary. The main thread between all is they are very deliberate with career moves, and all very smart and especially high IQ. Outside of being born rich or winning the lotto, you find very few accidental millionaires. I do just want to point out the irony that OP wrote high EQ. I said IQ just to give them the benefit of the doubt that they meant that, because I don't know what high EQ would mean here. As much as I like what I do, I don't think I would, make multiple moves across the globe for it. I don't know, I guess I'm not that kind of workaholic, or any kind of workaholic, but I do like what I do. But it sounds like being a multimillionaire or billionaire is not my future, and you know what? I think that's fine with me. Story 19. They never talk about money. If they are intellectually curious, which my boss was, and ranked by Forbes in the top 50 wealthiest people on the planet, they are able to suggest things that anyone limited by a budget would never think of, such as, a small submarine could be useful to hunt for those lost things. He did not get a sub for that project, but he did for a different project over deep ocean waters, all privately funded, but carrying out a personal project because the federal government was never going to do it. The guy values intellectual curiosity, and encourages you to follow a thread to see what there is to be found. I feel like there's not enough info for me to understand what this thing that he needed a small submarine, or suggested a small submarine could be good for, would be. Like, what does OP mean that anyone limited by a budget would never think of it? Because I gotta be honest, things that need a submarine, in my mind, tend to need a submarine. Like, there aren't a whole lot of other options there. Anyway, that's all the time we have for stories today. Sorry to end it on such a vague one, but there was a lot of interesting information in here. I also am just a fan of hearing stories about people who are really rich still being decent people. I feel like there's a lot of information or stories out there about rich people who aren't good people, so it's nice to get that balanced out every now and then just for the sake of my own brain. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you in the next one.